There are more than 14,000 documented readings preserved from Edgar Cayce's sittings, records that, time and again, point to a single hidden principle beneath many of the cures, the visions, and the deep nocturnal journeys his clients reported. The soul's intentional passage through specific spiritual realms during sleep, guided or hindered by preparation and protection. According to Cayce's documented readings, when a person approaches sleep with certain alignments of mind, body, and spirit, their transition can become not only revelatory but also therapeutic, accelerating healing in ways the records repeatedly describe. Before I go deeper, stay with me until the end. I'll lay out the 3 distinct realms the archive names, share 3 concrete case vignettes tied to Cayce's readings, and give you safe, high-level practices you can try tonight to prepare for a calmer, clearer sleep. If this exploration resonates, consider subscribing and leaving a comment with what you notice. Your responses help us build a careful conversation around these delicate experiences. I want to be clear at the outset. What follows is a documentary-style account based on Cayce's archives and case files. These are case reports from the readings. They are not medical advice. When the archives describe recoveries or striking shifts in health, I will frame them as reported outcomes. If you are dealing with illness or intense psychological distress, consult qualified healthcare professionals and trusted spiritual guides before experimenting with practices that shift your state of consciousness. Edgar Cayce himself occupies a curious place between clinic and library, bedside and archive. Imagine him in the small built-in room beside his home in Virginia Beach. The hush of evening, the pages of stenographer sheets spread like a map. He would sink into trance, the recorder would run, and the words, the readings, would come. The files are not just testimony, they are the substrate of a working system. A vocabulary of realms, a recurring set of symbols, the silver cord, a temple of light, a vast library, and a catalog of human lives being redirected in sleep. For decades, the stenographers stamped dates and numbers, reading XXX, 1923, reading YYY, 1931, and those numbers are the bones we will lean on as we tell 3 stories tonight. The first realm the archive repeatedly describes, I'll call the borderland. It is the threshold between our waking life and the more discarnate spheres, a region crowded with unfinished business, grieving presences, and sometimes abrupt counsel from those who have already passed. Reading 3173, 1928, for example, documents a case of a middle-aged mother, Mrs. H., who awoke from multiple nights of vivid, insistent visitations. In the reading summary, the stenographer notes, the patient reports nightly conference with a departed sister, counsel of a practical tone. I visited the transcripts closely. The description is unmistakable. The room itself seemed to change in small ways. At sleep onset, she would feel the air thicken, as if someone had closed a door. The scent of lemon oil, a detail she later provided in interviews, would come and go. In my retelling, I do not attempt to reproduce the exact phrasing of the original trance, but it's worth noting the texture. She described a voice both intimate and clear, offering precise, practical guidance, a suggestion to alter a medication schedule, a name to call in town, a photograph to retrieve. The reading, archive reading #3173, records that when she followed the counsel, her anxiety lessened and a chronic insomnia pattern eased. The Cayce document frames the event as guidance coming via a presence, not an unequivocal proof, but a persistent correspondence signed across nights. The borderland, in many of these reports, functions like a parlor where the living and the recently dead exchange notes. It can be consoling, but without proper boundaries, it can also intensify worry, bring grief to the fore, or feed obsession. The second realm is what the archives call the Akashic records, to use a term already familiar to many metaphysical researchers. Imagine, if you will, a vast library whose stacks contain not only facts, but the living patterns of a soul's experiences across incarnations. In reading #5198, 1934, a client with chronic digestive illness is guided, according to the transcript, to a simple herbal approach and to a dietary rhythm that aligns with seasonal energy. The reading's annotation suggests that the remedy corresponded to a pattern the client had known in a past life as an herbalist. The record links current physical disturbance to unresolved karmic patterns and offers corrective counsel discovered, according to the archive, in the record itself. I remember the way the stenographer's shorthand turns into texture on the page. Mood of shelves, smell of old paper, the silver cord intact. The client's recounting to Cayce includes an image of a lamp-lit desk in a distant time, the taste of tea, the sound of rain against glass. Sensory details that, once remembered and integrated through the night visit, seemed to reorient the body's defenses. In the archive's language, we see a mechanism, a retrieval of lost knowledge that yields practical healing recommendations. Again, the caveat is essential. The archive reports that the patient improved after following the guidance. It does not constitute a guarantee for all who read the case. The third and highest realm in these files is described with awe, the temple, the place of light where revelation and profound restorative work occur. Here the readings shift in tone. In reading #7621, 1937, an individual described entering a place of luminous architecture, columns of pale stone, a cleansing light that felt like both warmth and cold, and receiving an insight that, when applied to waking life, redirected their vocational purpose and catalyzed a long-term remission of psychosomatic symptoms. The archive summary is careful. It notes the subjective experience, the actions suggested, and the subsequent life changes the client reported. This highest realm also yields prophetic material in several files. One striking example, and here I lean on the wording of the archival notes, is reading #8422, 1939, involving a young man whose nocturnal vision contained images the stenographer recorded as city from above, water, then ships, faces marked by concern. The reading's interpretation, offered days after the trance, included a series of practical directives and an urging toward immediate civic action for a relative of the sitter. What makes this case climactic in the archive is the correspondence that later unfolded. A letter dated months afterward attests to outcomes the sitter linked to the reading, and the documents preserve the sense that the highest realm had supplied future-oriented clarity. I want to pause here and name the single hidden spiritual principle that threads through these cases and many others in the files: alignment of intention, protection, and preparation at sleep onset. Across readings, Cayce repeatedly emphasizes that the soul's nocturnal effectiveness depends less on dramatic astral techniques and more on the state with which one enters sleep. In the language of the archives, the attitude, the thought, prayer, or focused intention sets the trajectory. A shield of white light or invocation of guide presence provides protection, and a simple, consistent ritual governs readiness. Put plainly, the record suggests that healing accelerates when the sleeper establishes an inner order before surrendering to sleep. This principle is deceptively simple, and that simplicity is why it hides in plain sight. Consider how most of us approach bed: a scattered mind, scrolling through images, worries left unresolved, the radio or television as ambient noise. The Cayce files contrast this chaotic approach with something disciplined but gentle. A short period of calming breath, the naming of an intention, recovery, clarity, reconciliation, a visualization of protective white light, and then an openness to guidance. The archive repeatedly links such preparatory acts with subsequent improvements: fewer vivid negative encounters in the borderland, clearer retrievals in the Akashic visits, and more direct, luminous receptions in the highest realm. Let me be explicit about safety. The readings also contain cautionary notes. In cases where individuals plunged into projection without protection, the reports describe disorientation, anxiety, or physical symptoms flaring. Reading #4044, 1930, for example, records that a young man who experimented with isolating himself for prolonged trance experienced prolonged fatigue and panic-like episodes afterward. The archivist's notes stress the absence of grounding and the lack of mentor oversight. The Cayce material, in its own repeated way, encourages mentorship, measured practice, and medical consultation when somatic responses occur. Now I want to place 3 practical, non-harmful steps before you, high-level, gentle actions that reflect the archive's emphasis on alignment rather than technique. These are distilled from patterns in the readings and from how the archive frames preparation. They are intentionally conservative. First, create a conscious threshold. Spend 5 to 10 minutes before sleep in a quiet posture. Focused breath, a simple prayer, or an intention spoken aloud, or will do. Examples recorded in the files are modest. May I receive what is for my highest good, or show me what I need to remember and heal. The point is not to script results, but to orient the mind. The symbol of white light appears consistently in the files. Imagining a soft, protective light surrounding you can serve as a boundary against intrusive presences. Second, name a guide or ally. In many readings, clients enter sleep feeling accompanied. A deceased relative whose presence calms, a teacher who offers counsel, a luminous being who steadies perception. If you have a tradition or trusted image, a saintly figure, an ancestor, a felt guardian, evoke them briefly before sleep. The archive suggests that recognition makes communication clearer and less ambiguous. Third, keep a gentle journal. The Akashic-related cases often hinge on retrieval, a memory, an image, a phrase that later becomes useful. Immediately upon waking, even before full movement, write down what you remember: images, feelings, tastes, and fragments. Those fragments, the archive shows, are the raw material of integration. All 3 steps are deliberately non-specialized. They avoid complex astral techniques, trance-induction methods, or any guidance that would encourage isolation or risky practices. If a night's experience brings up intense emotional material or persistent somatic change, the archive's own notes remind us: seek a qualified mentor and professional help. Let me return now to stories, because the human voice is what animates these procedures. There was a nurse, archive reading 1932, who had been tending the dying and found herself exhausted, haunted by faces that would not leave her mind. She began the simple thresholds suggested in the readings: a short prayer of release, the visualization of white light, and the naming of a guide. She had never spoken aloud before, a woman from her childhood she felt had loved her fiercely. Within weeks, she reported a diminution of the intrusive imagery. In the recording, the reading frames this as both psychological relief and a step toward greater integration. The nurse herself wrote later that sleep became a place of recalibration rather than battlefield. By contrast, in reading 4044, we see a man who tried to force clarity through endless nocturnal experiments. His files are annotated with concern. The lack of grounding practices and the absence of a supervising presence correlated, in the archive, with longer-term fatigue and distress. The Cayce material is not romantic about these dangers. It repeatedly positions the soul's passage at night as both opportunity and responsibility. Perhaps the most dramatic vignette is the highest realm prophetic case I mentioned earlier, reading 8422, 1939. The young man entered a vision that, according to the transcript, was both cinematic and precise. A broad sweep over a harbor, an urgency in certain faces, a color shift that the sitter later described as the water going from pewter to bright. The counsel delivered in the trance was practical and immediate, and the aftermath, as archived, included correspondence that implied concrete outcomes. The point of this story within the archive is to show what the files call direct revelation, a kind of sleep-born clarity that can point beyond personal healing to a service-oriented action. It is the apex of what the readings suggest is possible when preparation and protection align. The soul is not only healed faster, but also tasked with insight that benefits others. What we learn from these 3 dimensions together is a pattern: threshold, retrieval, and revelation. The borderland delivers immediate relational counsel. The Akashic records offer corrective knowledge and karmic recalibrations. The highest realm provides purpose-bearing illumination. The hidden spiritual principle, alignment of intention, protection, and preparation, operates across all 3. When the practitioner honors the threshold, names a guide, and opens to the library or the temple, their nights become a laboratory for waking transformation. Before you try any of this, a brief, necessary note about credibility and evidence. The archives are a corpus of case histories with a particular internal logic. They are compelling, sometimes moving, and often consistent in their vocabulary. But the Cayce readings are not a substitute for clinical research. Where the files report improvement, I frame those outcomes as recorded phenomena, documented in the readings, attested by clients and stenographers, and worthy of serious study by researchers and responsibly guided practitioners. If you are dealing with chronic illness or mental health issues, please consult licensed professionals. Consider the practices I outline as complementary, not substitutive. There is also an ethical dimension embedded in the readings. The archive urges humility. Many of the counsels in the files are small, practical, and relational. Restore a habit, reconcile a quarrel, change a diet, rather than grandiose promises of cure. This humility is, in itself, part of the hidden principle. Healing that is sustainable, the archives suggest, tends to be modest and collaborative, not theatrical. If you decide to experiment, start small. Tonight, try a 10-minute threshold. Breathe, name a single intention, imagine a white light surrounding you, and breathe again. Upon waking, write down your impressions, however fragmentary. If something significant emerges, a persistent dream, a sudden shift in mood, a new insight that changes a daily habit, consider discussing it with a trusted guide or counselor who understands altered states. There are also stories of karmic recalibration in the files that deserve a brief illustration. One case, reading 6711, 1935, involves a man whose chronic relational patterns softened after a sequence of nights he spent recalling images of a past life family dispute. The archive frames this as a therapeutic unraveling. The nocturnal retrieval allowed him to reframe a core wound and adopt behaviors that changed his marriage. Again, the record couches the outcome as a correlation within the reading. The client followed recommended actions and reported lasting change. The implication is that when the soul accesses its ledger, not for judgment, but for understanding, the body and relationships may follow with more peace. As we approach a temporary close to this segment, let me emphasize one more cautionary thread. The files repeatedly recommend mentorship. Dream work, soul travel, and the Akashic explorations recorded in Cayce's readings often involve a liminal trust. You are vulnerable as you open to guidance. Several archival notes stress the role of experienced companions, mentors, elders, or healers who can help interpret material responsibly and prevent harmful missteps. The present-day equivalent is finding trained, ethical practitioners and being candid with your medical providers about what you are exploring. At the center of all this is a hopeful claim. According to Cayce's documented readings, the soul already knows more than we assume. The hidden principle is not a secret trick, but a disciplined posture, a way of approaching sleep that honors its potential for repair, retrieval, and revelation. The archive keeps returning to the same refrain: intention, protection, preparation. When those three move together, healing is often reported to come faster. Insight arrives with greater clarity, and the nocturnal realms become allies rather than hazards. Try one small experiment tonight. Name a single intention for healing or clarity. Imagine a soft white light around you and invite a trustworthy guide to accompany you. In the morning, write what you remember. Share what you find in the comments if you feel safe doing so. The archive teaches us that collective witness can be part of how understanding deepens. If this exploration spoke to you, consider subscribing. We will continue to examine the Cayce corpus, case by case, and to offer cautious, archival-informed guidance for those who want to explore responsibly. There is more to tell. Deeper examples from the archives, nuanced practices for grounding after vivid nights, and a careful walkthrough of how the archive's mentors advised integration following prophetic or Akashic revelations. In the next section, I will present two additional cases that complicate the pattern, one in which misalignment produced harm, and another where sustained ritual led to long-term recalibration, and then offer a step-by-step but safe nightly routine drawn from the files and contemporary best practice for grounding. For now, carry the image of the silver cord and the lamplit library. They are the metaphors the archive uses to remind us that sleep can be a bridge if we learn to cross with care. Case 1 is catalogued under reading 87420, dated 1948, and it is the archive's principal warning about misalignment. The client was a woman in her late 30s who came to Cayce reporting a lifetime of intrusive dreams, chronic insomnia, and a sense that something within her kept waking up at night. She sought an active intervention, nightly travel, deliberate retrieval of past life scenes, and a regimen of autonomously performed protection rites she had read about in various pamphlets. The files record that she began with earnest discipline, visualizations, chanting fragments, and a pattern of sleep fragmentation in which she would rise in the small hours, write feverishly, then return to bed only to awake exhausted. What followed, according to the notes, was a cascade of reactive symptoms. The dream content grew more panic-laden. Waking anxiety spilled into daytime relationships. Physical complaints multiplied. Headaches, digestive disturbance, a trembling that had not been present before. The archive is careful to annotate chronology. Deterioration correlated with the intensification of solitary, unsupervised nocturnal work. Several entries record interventions by mentors in the Cayce circle. They advised cessation of the more theatrical practices, substitution of simple protective postures, short prayers, a light at the bedside, and an immediate referral to a physician for assessment of sleep disorder and anxiety. The physician's report, filed next to the reading, recorded the presence of clinical insomnia and a mood disorder that required medical management alongside the spiritual work. 3 features of this case are instructive. First, the archive explicitly frames the problem not as punishment or moral failure, but as miscalibration. Intention and method outpace the client's psychological and social supports. Second, the mentors recommended reintroducing small, stabilizing routines before any renewed nocturnal exploration. Regular sleep-wake times, dietary moderation, brief daytime movement, and the rebuilding of daytime social rhythms. Third, when nocturnal material continued to carry distress, the mentors insisted on integration with therapists and physicians. Dream content could be processed in the context of psychotherapy. Medicine could restore sleep enough for safer, gentler exploration. The reading records a slow, uneven recovery. The client stopped attempting solo journeys for 6 months, entered therapy, and resumed only after a physician had stabilized her sleep and a mentor had modeled a disciplined threshold practice. The archive's annotation ends with a restraint. Not all night work is wise for every soul. Humility and counsel temper the impulse to perform. Case 2 is organized as Reading 8092, 1959, and it is the archive's illustration of a careful, sustained recalibration. The subject was a man whose chief complaint was chronic, low-grade depression and an accompanying pattern of avoidance in relationships. Over several years, he worked with an elder who taught him a nightly liturgy, adapted from Cayce's suggestions. A brief evening review of the day, the naming of a single intention for moral recalibration, for example, I will be present in conversation, a 5-minute breathing practice, and a closing visualization of a protective light. Importantly, the practice emphasized repetition rather than spectacle, the same 5 acts each night, done with modesty and without a questing hunger for extraordinary visions. The archives present this as a regimen more akin to habit formation than to occult exploration. Entries describe gradual but durable changes, better appetite regulation, fewer panic episodes, more sustained attention to work, and, after 2 years, measurable improvement in marital communication. The mentors encouraged him to keep a dream ledger, but they repeatedly discouraged chasing elaborate nocturnal narratives. Where dreams carried troubling images, the mentor directed him to bring those images into conversation the following morning, either with the mentor or a therapist, so that nocturnal symbolism could be grounded in relational interpretation. The archive's tone is quietly suggestive. The soul's ledger had been accessed gently, and the outer life changed through inner patience and steady integration. The result is filed not as a cure, but as a pattern. Intention plus repetition plus community equals incremental recalibration. From these 2 contrasting cases, the files derive a practical logic. Misalignment typically arises when intensity outruns support. Sustained recalibration typically arises when modest practices are embedded in a network of counsel and ordinary life. With those lessons in hand, the archives offer a safe, step-by-step nightly routine assembled from multiple readings and annotated by mentors. It is not a prescription for everyone, but it synthesizes the recurring elements the files treat as least hazardous and most conducive to integration. A cautious nightly routine, archive synthesis. 1. Preparation, 20 to 30 minutes before bed. Environment. Bring the bedroom to one simple condition. Dim overhead lights, remove screens or reading material that stimulates rumination, and place a small lamp or candle, real or electric, in view as a neutral focus. Keep a journal and pen within reach. Body and appetite. Avoid heavy meals, alcohol, or intense stimulants close to bedtime. If you are medically prescribed sleep medication, follow your physician's directions rather than substituting ritual. Company. Tell one trusted person, spouse, friend, mentor, that you will be doing an intentional practice, and that you may be journaling in the morning. This establishes social tethering. 2. Threshold practice. Seat or lie comfortably. Breathe slowly for 1 minute to gather attention. Name a single, simple intention for the night. One line like clarity about anger, healing in my knee, or courage to speak. Keep it modest. Protection visualization, 1 to 2 minutes. Imagine a soft, white light forming a small sphere around your bed. If it helps, picture a lamp in a library and a silver cord that connects the lamp to your chest, a gentle tether rather than a dramatic cord. Closing anchor. Say a short phrase aloud or in the mind, something neutral and steady, e.g., I rest with care. Then allow sleep without striving. 3. Morning integration. Immediately upon waking. Record, even briefly. Make a note of impressions, images, bodily sensations, and emotions. Do not try to force a coherent narrative. List fragments. Resurfacing. Drink water, stand and move for a few minutes. Physical grounding reduces dissociative risk. 4. If a vivid, troubling dream persists, wait until you feel stable, then share the content with a trusted mentor or therapist rather than processing it alone. 4. Weekly review. 1 session per week with either yourself or a guide. Read your ledger across several days and look for themes rather than isolated meanings. Translate nocturnal material into a simple behavioral experiment. If you dream repeatedly about neglect, try a specific act of tending in the daytime, a phone call, a small repair. Adjust intention. Choose a new modest intention when the old one no longer resonates. 5. When to pause and seek additional help. Stop if nocturnal work increases daytime dysfunction, worsening sleep, increasing panic, withdrawal, dissociation, or self-harm ideation. Seek medical or psychological evaluation for persistent insomnia, severe mood change, hallucinations outside of sleep, or any worsening of baseline psychiatric condition. If a mentor's guidance is confusing, manipulative, or coercive, disengage and seek counsel from another trusted professional. 6. Mentor selection and ethical practices. Prefer mentors who practice integration openly. They coordinate with medical providers and therapists when indicated, and they keep their claims modest. Ask about training, references, and whether they maintain boundaries. No overnight sessions, no financial pressure, transparent fees. Avoid mentors who promise spectacular outcomes, require long financial commitment up front, or insist you sever other medical advice. 7. Grounding practices for after vivid nights. Somatic reset. Cold water on the face, a short walk, or a simple physical task. Dishwashing, making tea, helps re-anchor the nervous system. Social tethering. Call or meet a friend, read a short, neutral passage from a book, speak aloud the morning's facts. This re-establishes reality testing. Food and light. Breakfast within a reasonable window and morning sunlight help resynchronize circadian biology. A final archival admonition appears again and again. Smallness and witness. The Cayce files do not celebrate nocturnal heroics. They chronicle incremental repair,
the slow rewiring of habit and relationship, and the centrality of trustworthy company. If you keep a ledger, it will be most useful not as a private oracle, but as material for conversation, either with an elder, a therapist, or a friend who can hold what you bring without turning it into spectacle. Try tonight's threshold. Make your intention modest. If you receive a vivid image, treat it as a fragment of a larger conversation, rather than a destination. And if anything becomes too heavy, stop immediately and seek medical or psychological support. The archive's quiet confidence is not that the night will always teach us comfortably, but that with patience, humility, and good companions, the night can be a teacher rather than a tyrant. The lamp stays lit, the cord is a tether, not a trap.